Here's some fun news. Haaretz and government crosshairs after publisher calls terrorists freedom fighters. Newspaper boss also tells his conference in London that Israel's imposing an apartheid should be sanctioned, and some ministries cut ties with it. The government is considering a complete boycott. Great stuff overall, I think, for what a wonderful year this has been for press and journalism globally. Israel has killed, I think, at this point, more journalists than the amount of journalists that died in World War II. Israel has done that already. It's wonderful. They have a complete censure internally. They also, on top of that, they have shut down the Al Jazeera offices inside of Israel, and then also in occupied West Bank, which is again doubly illegal. Beyond that, in the United States of America, you have Washington Post and Los Angeles Times. Washington Post and Los Angeles Times also refusing to endorse a candidate because they're like, whether you agree with that sentiment or not doesn't matter. The fact that like a billionaire can step in and be like, no, I own this paper. I'm the real boss. Cool stuff overall. Washington Post lost 200,000 plus subscriptions as a direct consequence of this. It's genuinely terrifying. And also on top of that, you have, one of the largest progressive voices online in North America, at the very least, myself, getting relentlessly and mercilessly attacked by the biggest charlatans of all time, 4 days out of from an election, with the hopes that, I'll be silenced also for my criticisms of the apartheid state of Israel. And now Israel itself is saying, like, even Haaretz is an Israeli newspaper, by the way, is saying unimaginably, unacceptably anti-Semitic things. Really cool. Yeah, here it is. After Haaretz publisher Amos Shakan suggested sanctions on Israel over apartheid in the West Bank, Justice Minister Yariv Levin announced he's publishing a bill to impose a 20-year prison sentence for Israelis advocating sanctions, which ironically proves Shakan's point. Dude, Zionist got a congressman to write to Twitch. I'm sure you saw it. Yeah, I did. A congressman who's supposed to be a Democrat, by the way, which is also doubly funny. Yeah, we are in a really unique predicament. I think as things before things get better, they are slated to get worse. What is this? Here is
apartheid regime on the Palestinian population. It dismisses the costs of both sides for defending the settlements while fighting the Palestinian freedom fighter that Israel calls terrorists. In a sense, what is taking place now in the occupied territories and in part of Gaza is a second Nakba. A Palestinian state must be established. And the only way to achieve this, I think, is to apply sanctions against Israel, against the leaders who oppose it, and against the settlers, the Netanyahu government.
I need people to understand that you can say no. You can say no to all of this. It's allowed. It's appropriate. Meanwhile, Schumer pledges to pass anti-Semitism bill in Senate's lame duck session. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer recently promised Jewish leaders that he would try later this year to pass a bill aimed at curbing anti-Semitism on college campuses. Why it matters. The bill would be Congress's most forceful response to the pro-Palestinian protests on college campuses across the country this spring, which sometimes led to the harassment of Jewish students. That's an insane way to write that article. Wow. Between the lines. However, critics argued the definition of anti-Semitism the legislation offers is overly broad. A nonprofit group has spent about $5 million on an ad campaign blasting Schumer, the highest-ranking Jewish lawmaker, for his inaction. Schumer has privately said he plans to attach Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, making the federal government adopt the broad definition of anti-Semitism to enforce anti-discrimination laws, to a must-pass defense bill after the election, multiple sources told us. The bill passed the House overwhelmingly over the summer, but it has been a divisive issue in the Democratic Party, laying bare internal strife. The nonprofit group behind the ads, Florence Avenue Initiative, doesn't have to disclose its donors. The big picture, frustrations from pro-Israel groups have grown since the bill passed the House in May, repeatedly asking Schumer to get it through the Senate. Sources familiar with the discussion say they remain skeptical that Schumer will get the bill through the Senate this year. Pennsylvania GOP Senate nominee Dave McCormick has used the Senate's inaction on the bill to attack Senator Bob Casey to court Jewish voters. McCormick slammed Casey and Senate Democrats for leaving Washington this fall without passing the bill in an op-ed for the New York Post. Also, meanwhile, Canada adopted the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, and that is completely unacceptable. It means that, like, it doesn't even internally make sense. But basically, if you criticize Israel, you're anti-Semitic is the official position of the Canadian government. The preamble is comprised of 3 subsections. First subsection, whatever. Conversely, criticism of Israel that is different, for example, in terms of its nature, magnitude, severity, or suggested remedy, then that leveled against any other country is presumptively anti-Semitic because it's discriminatory. The second subsection also describes how anti-Semitism often manifests through conspiracy theories, myths, and conspiratorial thinking, as well as scapegoating. Anti-Semitism is broadly anchored to the notion that Jews are the enemy of all that is good and the embodiment of all that is evil, depending on what is considered to be good and evil by each individual in each society. There are obviously like appropriate parts of the IHRA definition, which is, of course, you know, when you say Jews control the media or things of that nature. Here's Independent Jewish Voices, a grassroots organization. The IHRA handbook poses a danger to Palestinians, Jews, and all Canadians who advocate for Palestinian human rights. We call for the handbook's immediate retraction and urge all Canadians to reject it. While the handbook includes several genuine examples of anti-Semitism, it also includes examples that plainly constitute political speech. In doing so, it promotes the anti-Palestinian racist idea that virtually all Palestinians and their supporters are inherently anti-Semitic. Here's an example. A post made on Instagram claimed you can't be anti-racist and Zionist, and that Zionism is a racist, violent, settler colonial project to ethnically cleanse Palestine or Palestinians, including by genocide. This was considered an anti-Semitic political act, okay? I need you to understand this correct statement, okay? This correct statement about Zionism, a political ideology akin to fascism, which is like an inherently fascist political ideology, that revolves around the maintenance of a ethnic religious supremacist in-group with the forcible expulsion of an out-group of indigenous populations that are living on that land, and the constant domination of said population is a racist, violent, settler colonial project. Okay, that is what it is, and now labeling it as such is considered anti-Semitic. By tying Canadian Jews' efforts to that shield Israel, a state currently committing a genocide in Gaza, from legitimate criticism, the government is also fueling anti-Semitism. Conflating Jewish identity with the actions of Israel only serves to deepen dangerous stereotypes about Jews. Yeah, something that I've reiterated time and time again. It's crazy that we are openly saying, like, you cannot say the truth. It is now illegal to say the truth. ACLU, Human Rights Watch, and Amnesty International are calling on U.S. colleges to protect the right to protest. Say, while they've spoken out separately in the past, they came together to give in the high concern of force against protesters. It suggests colleges risk violating international human rights law, which they are. This is exactly the kind of shit that was completely ridiculous. I have already covered Project Esther, which is the Heritage Foundation's direct targeting measure to try to slap RICO charges on pro-Palestinian demonstrators in a direct effort to jail, arrest, and possibly deport anti-Israel campus protesters and just anyone who dares defy Israel in the United States of America. So on the one hand, you have a great expansion of what constitutes anti-Semitic speech from the Democratic side being potentially advanced, as Chuck Schumer gives assurances that he will pass an anti-Semitism bill in the Senate's lame duck session, tying it to a must-pass defense bill, right? On the other hand, you have deportations and RICO and jail if you dare criticize the apartheid state of Israel. It's actually quite alarming. Israel itself is also taking action or trying to take action against its own newspapers for saying the truth. I don't know. It's pretty wild stuff. I don't know what else to say about this situation. It's just like, it's so horrific. It is yet another glaringly obvious incursion into free speech, a liberal principle that Western nations were supposed to be built upon. You know, there's a difference between bigotry, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, hate crimes, hate speech, versus like an accurate assessment of an entire nation state being an apartheid state and criticizing an entire nation state that is trying to do fascist policies. Like, openly criticizing Israel is not only valid, but it's the moral thing to do. And it's really interesting that Americans who claim to care about free speech are just so awfully quiet about this. Are you scared genuinely? I'm sad. I mean, you know what you're doing is right when an apartheid state is coming down on the niches of niches streamers who are like, yo, genocide bad. Yeah. Here's Ta-Nehisi Coates speaking on his opinion and the repercussions.
Or public figures fear that they get marginalized. over putting that view out publicly.
So how does that work? Like I think Gaza is genocide, and then what happens?
And then you don't get invited on, let's say, on the top networks anymore, or you don't get interviewed by the top magazines.
I don't give a fuck. Like I really like, I love, like, obviously I like being honored. I like that people like my work. I like that I get invited on those networks to make those cases. But like at the end of the day, I close up my computer. I kiss my beautiful wife. I call my lovely son. You know what I mean? I hang out with my beautiful friends. You know what I mean? Those are the things. That's why when we started this conversation, I was talking about the love part, which people can. And the thing that I guess the reason why it is unfortunate to me that people can't see that is because part of this is what we model. And we model this notion that being a writer means that people with power and people with platforms are supposed to like you, want to put you on. You got to be able to go home at the end of the day. You know what I mean? Like your kids, your family, they have to be able to look at you and respect you as a human being and as a person and as a writer. And so if you're out here dancing because, you know, you might not get back invited on some network somewhere. I mean, I don't know what it was all for. I don't know why, right? There are a lot of other ways where you can be more respected and, you know, become a lot wealthier than this.
The point that I was...
Did you always know that the West doesn't give a fuck about free speech or human rights and genocide, or even surprised? It's not necessarily that I'm surprised by it. I mean, this is, if you are a student of American history, you've already seen this happen time and time again, and maybe even worse things, right? Than just simply saying, you cannot continue speaking your mind. You cannot continue saying the truth. I think that there are far worse consequences for people than that in American history, in terms of their opinion, in terms of what they've been brave enough to say. And by that, I mean like literal death, right? Arrests and murders, assassinations and the like. It's still frustrating, you know? It's also partially frustrating because not only is this the truth, but also a lot of people understand it. A lot more people than you think. I know that I often talk about like the New York Times or Washington Post or Los Angeles Times. Like, I know reporters at these outlets. I know them personally. I know them well. Some of them are in here, parts of this community. Some of them tune in for the coverage. And I talk to them. I talk to producers at CNN. I talk to producers at other outlets, MSNBC, commentators. And there are far more people than you think that know the truth. There are far more people, especially on the lower levels, especially on the ground level, especially on the reporting side of things, that are very aware of what's going on. And they understand, they recognize right from wrong. And I think that's why there is a lot of leeway given, and that a lot of the, oh, you're criticizing Israel, I'm going to portray you as an anti-Semite narratives are now relegated to the likes of the New York Post, which is a right-wing dish rag, right? And the most ardent defenders of Israel are the likes of Michael Rappaport, you know, disgraced figures in general that most people kind of look at and go, ugh, okay, dude, calm down. The likes of Richie Torres. Like, the ADL has also lost its sauce in many ways. I think that there are far more people. I think that there are far more people out there that know right from wrong, and you kind of see it every now and then. I can't speak for the UK, but the only thing you can do is keep pushing, you know? Keep protesting, keep making noise, keep disrupting. There's nothing else that you can do in spite of all of the attacks. And hope that one day history will vindicate you, and hope that one day many Americans, the rest of society, will be open-minded enough to recognize right from wrong in the same way. It's so funny how the ADL never goes against Republicans. Yes, because Republicans are unconditionally pro-Israel. Why the fuck would the ADL go after people that are on their side? Their ultimate goal is to defend Israel. Anyway, how do you argue with the people who invoke the original idea of Zionism and ignore what it devolved into? I mean, you can point to many famous examples of people who are, originally Zionists, Holocaust survivors who were Zionists, who very quickly recognized that it was built on top of a lie. A land without people for a people without land is a lie. A land without people had people in it. Israel forcibly expelled 750,000 Palestinians in the Nakba and never allowed them to return ever again. So clearly, there were people there. Albert Einstein is another example of a famous Zionist, so much so that they want him to be the first president of Israel. He warned about Zionism being and behaving in exactly the same ways as fascist and Nazi Germany behaved. That kind of sentiment, when I express it, is immediately clocked by Israel defenders as anti-Semitic, the most anti-Semitic thing anyone has ever said. Fucking Albert Einstein said it. Noam Chomsky is another prominent example of someone who went and saw the kibbutzim. He lived there and then spent the rest of his life saying, yeah, this is unacceptable. This is fascism. This is fascist. You can understand how the Holocaust galvanized public opinion in favor of Zionism while still rejecting it as an ethno-nationalist ideology. Yeah, no, I that's why I'm giving you prominent examples of early Zionists that thought, oh, what a wonderful idea. Jewish people have a long history of being forcibly expelled from villages and countries, towns that they lived in. The Holocaust being, the largest event of expulsion and death and destruction. That's what's so dangerous about Zionism being an inherently fascist ideology, is that it's built atop real hurt and real harm that Jewish people have historically faced. It is precisely because of that there is validity to real existing anti-Semitism fears. As a Jew raised in America, growing up, I was taught that Zionist was a racial slur. Now I know better, but I think that's part of the reason people refuse to even listen to you. I think plenty of people listen to me. Plenty more people, at least, now than ever before. But I think that scares a lot of people. A lot of people who still think that I'm using Zionist as a substitute for Jew to be secretly anti-Semitic, while in the process of regularly and routinely speaking out against real anti-Semitism. Sure, but if it can all be summed up as colonial imperialism, then what side are you on? The side of almost every powerful country on the planet, or the side that would be willing to do anything to disrupt modern civilized society under the pretext that is inherently bad and should be disassembled? Yeah, this is the issue here, That's what happened in a lot of places. What about pretty much every other instance where it's happened? Just living in America supports the very concept you seem to be against. Fantastic argument, my friend. There has never been a moment where I have not recognized the indigenous genocide that occurred for the United States to exist in its current form, nor have I ever denied the atrocities committed in the form of chattel slavery. As a matter of fact, a big part of what I do is try to explain these concepts to Americans who refuse to understand it. The problem is, you're looking at historic wrongs. You're arguing with a guy who, advocates for these historically wronged people, while in the process of defending the ongoing wrong that resembles the historic wrong, saying might is right. And not only that, but then you're packaging it with like colonial supremacist ideals, such as the other side is willing to do anything to disrupt modern civilized society under the pretext that it's inherently bad and should be disassembled. All you've done in this circumstance is engage in whataboutism and then followed it up with like some inherently racialized, infantilizing, savage barbarian tropes. Palestinians are, as a whole, incredibly well read. Like, they have a higher literacy rate than I believe even Israeli society, if I'm not mistaken. It's your assumption that they are barbaric in spite of the circumstances that they are subjected to. Like, why is it that you decided that? Why is it that you chose to believe this thing, that they are just bad? Perhaps this requires some self-examination. Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying anything specific about you. Rather, I'm just wondering, what exactly do you think the solution to this complex modern dilemma is, other than inciting violence? What do you mean? I'm against that. I'm against further violence. I want the violence to end. It's not actually a complex modern dilemma at all. One side is a nuclear militarized state and is actually pummeling defenseless people with incredible frequency every single day. And they only get to do that because my state that I currently live in allows Israel to do so. It gives Israel the weapons to do so. It offers Israel the political cover to be able to do so, because America is the global superpower. It is the hegemonic power that dominates the entire planet. So whatever we say goes. This also comes with the recognition, by the way, that there have been historic wrongs that were committed. So if you read it in history books and you recognize right from wrong then, why can't you apply it to a modern standard? We're at 50,000 dead civilians past needing to say I'm not anti-Semitic when we shit on Zionism. It's ridiculous at this point. It doesn't matter. I'm in the United States of America. There are plenty of people who will falsely smear me as an anti-Semite. I'm not going to discard that. I'm going to every single time talk about real existing anti-Semitism and what it looks like and combat it. It is very much a part of what I believe in general, regardless of what cynical smears I get fucking attacked with, because it is something that I think is important to address. And it's precisely the reason why I have for years continuously addressed it. As Dr. Ofer Kasif, Israeli Knesset member, once told me in our early October conversation in 2023, anti-Semitism is a crime, anti-Zionism is a duty. My whole point is that there are some people who refuse to listen and think you're saying racial slurs just by talking about the problem. Yeah, I know. So what? I advocated for Black Lives Matter and the disproportionate targeting of black people in the hands of the American police for many years before it was fashionable to do so. I advocated for it when Barack Obama was antagonistic towards Black Lives Matter. That didn't stop me from advocating for it regardless. Many Americans looked at that and said, this is black terrorism. You're anti-white. It never stopped me. So people immediately discounting what I have to say because of my background or because of fears that they have that are completely ridiculous in terms of me being secretly an anti-Semite is not going to stop me from advocating for the emancipation of Palestinian people, for all people. We are facing down the barrel of a dual fascist leadership. You have already a fascist leadership in Israel, and that is playing itself out in incredibly violent ways. America has a lot of resilient, underlying, unexamined fascism as well, and it's slated to get a lot worse with Donald Trump. I don't disagree and I hate Bibi, but it's so hard to look at Holocaust survivors and tell them that the only Jewish country shouldn't exist. How Israel exists matters. This is precisely the point. How it exists, and it cannot exist as an apartheid. This is where we arrive at the problem. Israel's demographic concerns are inherently fascist. It is an ethno-state. Like when a country says we have demographic concerns, that's genuinely scary shit. It's kind of like if Americans were openly being like, we have demographic concerns. Oh wait, they do say that. It's called white supremacy, and we understand it as such. We understand it as a genuinely dangerous idea. Do you see what I mean? It's not about you secretly being an anti-Semite. People think that being anti-Zionist is intrinsically anti-Semitic, though. No, I know people think that. They're wrong. I think a lot of the justifications and defenses of Zionism is inherently anti-Semitic. What are your incentives? What do you mean? What are my incentives? Ebola virus? I don't know what you're talking about. And by the way, you can tell your grandparents that they're wrong. Chatter. Tell my grandparents they're wrong all the time if they have wrong opinions. This guy, I'm like, what do you mean? What are my incentives? And he just repeats, what are your incentives? You say that a lot. Could you explain how Zionism is anti-Semitic? Just curious. Of course. Something that I repeat all the time. Zionism and the way that it exists is a maintenance of an ethnic superiority and an ethnic majority in a land where there are more Palestinians who are not Jewish than there are Jewish people. In order to keep that going, you have to maintain an apartheid. You have to maintain a permanent occupation over an indigenous population. The notion that this concept represents the interests of all Jews and that all Jews are monolithic in their understanding of Israel and in their defense of Israel is the exact same thing that Nazis say about Jews. Zionists in defense of Israel and anti-Semitic Nazis who hate Israel say the exact same thing. They play into the dual loyalty tropes. Wait, I missed there's more Palestinians than Jews there? Yes. This is the reason why there is a permanent military occupation. Anyway, saying Judaism and Zionism are inherently linked undermines my identity. I come from a long line of secular, non-Zionist Jews, and I find it incredibly offensive to be ignored or othered because of that. That's how it's anti-Semitic. Well, that too. I realize this is something you just have to do, but it's genuinely upsetting how every conversation about Palestinian emancipation gets hijacked and becomes about condemning anti-Semitism. It's okay. I will always do that. I live in the Western world. There are many people who don't even broach the subject matter. You know, they don't even look at it. So it's understandable that people will have these hangups. I make an argument to the audience that I know is listening. Always. I try to tailor my message specifically to the audience that's listening. I'm in the Western world. There's plenty of people who have been taught this wrong lesson and are subject to social conditioning. My job is to try and shake them out of this stupor.
Trying to make is I think that's the position that a lot of Palestinians and pro-Palestinian voices find themselves in. Is
Yes,
that
they do.
even
Yes.
even if they get invited, even if they do get invited on the top networks, it's always in limited doses, because at the end of the day, they're not really finding an audience for what they have to say, or the networks don't necessarily like what they have to offer.
Yeah. And I feel like it's like you acquire an amount of capital, you know, but what was it for? Like, what is it? What do you want to use? And I take your point. I don't want to be dismissive of what you're saying. There was a certain amount of career capital that allows me to go certain places and say certain things, right? But why did I acquire that capital? You know what I mean? Like, did I acquire that capital simply to go to those places? Or did I acquire that capital to deliver a message when I'm there? You know, we get into this like with politicians, right? And so they don't take certain positions because they fear losing like their seat, right? But it's like, why did you want the seat in the first place?
I have a coworker that's pro-Israel but makes anti-Semitic jokes all the time. But since I'm pro-Palestinian and anti-Zionist, he calls me anti-Semitic and anti-American, and it breaks my brain. Oh, is he a Destiny fan? Are you co-workers with Destiny and his entire community? Very commonplace.
Listen, this is very simple to me. If the price of having access to those networks and to those places is that I have to act like I did not see apartheid, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm a black writer. Like, I'm the descendant of this. And you telling me I got to look away from segregation, which is about the mildest word I can say about it? That's the price of it? No. I mean, I don't know what we're doing here.
Ta-Nehisi Coates gets it.